The rest of the workday blurred together. I kept my phone face down on the desk, refusing to glance at the notifications that lit its edge every few minutes. Elias had sent 3 more messages after that warning, each one softer, trying to pull back from the sharp edge of his last reply. He asked if I was upset, if he'd said something wrong, if we could talk it out calmly. I did not open a single one. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, I logged out of my work laptop, grabbed my bag, and walked straight to my car without making eye contact with anyone, especially Caroline. The drive home felt longer than usual. Atlanta rush hour traffic crawled along the highway, brake lights stretching as far as I could see, and every idle minute gave space for Elias's words to loop in my head. "You really shouldn't try." I told myself it was just emotional manipulation, a desperate line from a man who hated being left alone. Once I blocked him, once the fake profile was gone, there would be no trail for him to follow. When I pulled into the driveway of my small townhome, I locked the front door behind me and went straight to the spare bedroom, where I kept the tablet used only for the fake account. My fingers moved fast. I downloaded every transfer receipt, every screenshot of our conversations, saving copies onto an external drive I kept hidden under the floorboard of my closet. Then I pulled up the social media profile built around Caroline's photos and began deleting posts one by one. The process took nearly an hour. Before hitting the final delete button on the account itself, I paused. A tiny voice wondered if I should leave it active for a few more days to avoid triggering immediate alarm. I shook the thought. Delaying only created more risk. I confirmed deletion, then blocked every phone number, email address, and messaging handle Elias had ever used to. I didn't give her every detail. Just said I was ending an online relationship and planned to move north within a couple months. She listened carefully over the faint hum of her apartment's air conditioner in the back. "Are you sure this is the cleanest way?" Cutting off all contact without an explanation can make people, especially someone who's that. I told her no worry, that everything, and ended the call soon after. I didn't have the courage to admit I'd built the whole relationship on stolen photos. The next morning, I woke early and logged into my portal. The money Elias had sent sat in my checking account, and I began the process to shift most of it into a separate savings account with a different bank, one he had no way to trace. The transfer would take 2 business days to complete. I sipped coffee at the counter, trying to, but unease lingered. Town. Elias Voss sat in his downtown high office, staring at a blank. Every attempt to send a note back. Calls went straight voicemail. The profile he'd spoken to for 8 months no longer existed. For most people, that might be the end of it. A ghosting story filed away and forgotten. But Elias had spent years learning to follow threads, building his real estate company by tracking down details. He pulled up the old photos saved to a computer, the ones the woman shared with him, and sent them to a digital forensics contact he'd find out who belonged to. He wrote in his email. Full name, social media profiles, place of employment, any public. By midday, the reply landed in box. The face in every photo belonged to Line Hale, a senior account manager at a marketing agency in the northern Atlanta suburbs. Elias read the name slowly, confusion settling in his chest. He did not know Caroline. He had never met her. If the woman he'd spoken to for months Caroline, then who had he been talking to? Meanwhile, Caroline was settling into her desk when a notification popped on her personal phone. A friend from college screenshot. A private message from an unfamiliar account asking if she'd created a secondary line. More messages trickled over the next hour, former co-workers and distant acquaintances reaching out to say someone was using her pictures to talk online. Her jaw tightened. She pulled up her public Instagram and scanned every post, realizing the stolen images years. By lunch break, Caroline had filled out an impersonation report with the social team. She considered who might do this, running the office. People got along with her. Only one person kept to herself, quiet and withdrawn, Mercer. Caroline frowned, pushing the thought aside. Lila seemed too timid to be this elaborate. Still, that afternoon at work, I noticed Caroline watching me from across the open more than once. Every time our eyes nearly met, I ducked my head down toward my keyboard, pretending to focus on spreadsheets. I told myself she had no proof, no reason to suspect me. But as the workday wound down, I saw her step into the conference room with our manager, phone in hand, on the screen. My stomach twisted. I couldn't walk toward the restroom, steady my breathing. I thought deleting the profile would erase the trail entirely. I had not considered that the phone belonged to a real woman, a 1 feet away from me. Somewhere, The thread I'd tried to cut was already being pulled on the other end, and I could feel the whole fragile lie starting to unravel. The hum of the office break room refrigerator faded into the background as I stared at my phone screen, my thumb hovering over the send button. 8 months of talking to Elias, 8 months living behind Caroline Hale's face, and I was finally ready to walk away. For 3 long years, Caroline had chipped away at every part of my confidence here at the marketing agency. She'd taken credit for my campaign drafts, sighed loudly when I spoke in team meetings, and made sure every coworker knew she thought I was lazy and incompetent. No one had stepped in. No manager had pulled her aside to check the pattern. Slowly, I'd learned to shrink into my cubicle, to stop volunteering ideas, to survive each workday 1 quiet hour at a time. It started on a sleepless Saturday night, scrolling through Caroline's public Instagram while frustration burned sharp in my chest. Her feed was polished. Weekend brunch photos, professional headshots, vacation snapshots from coastal Georgia. On impulse, I pulled a handful of those photos, created a brand new profile under a soft, made-up name, and set out to find someone who wouldn't know the difference. That was how I matched with Elias Voss. His profile was understated for a CEO. No flashy luxury reels, just quiet shots of office buildings he'd developed, and a rescue dog he'd adopted alone. Our conversations clicked fast. He listened, asked thoughtful questions, never pushed too hard at first. He was gentle, generous with his words, and before long, generous with money too. At first, I turned down every offer. Then rent went up on my townhome. My car needed expensive brake repairs, and the weight of 3 years of unaddressed bullying felt heavier than ever. I told myself the money was small compensation for everything Caroline had put me through. I wove stories about a difficult family situation, careful never to give real addresses, real work details, anything that could trace back to Lila murder. Elias sent steady transfers, enough to cover bills and build a small escape fund. The catch, the thing I'd underestimated, was how attached he grew. Text messages came morning and night. He wanted to know every meal I ate, every errand I ran, every thought crossing my mind. If I took a few hours to reply, he grew quiet, anxious, afraid I'd pull away. I'd written it off as harmless insecurity until the past 2 weeks, when his messages turned sharper, less easy to brush aside. I'd mapped out every step of disappearance, closed the fake social profile, moved the money into a separate high-yield saving account, block every phone number and email he used. I'd found a small apartment rental listing further north, outside the Atlanta suburbs, somewhere no one from this office. Before I cut every cord, though, curiosity got the better of me. I typed out the question, watching the cursor blink on. What would you do if I suddenly vanished? I hit send and set the phone face up on the linoleum counter, listening to a coworker laugh down the hallway. The 3 dots popped up almost immediately, froze. 2 full seconds passed, long enough for my heartbeat to pick. When his reply arrived, it was short, stripped of all the warmth I'd grown reading. You really try. A cold prickle ran up my spine. I'd expected sadness, confusion, maybe a plea for me to stay. Not a warning. My fingers tightened around the phone. I told myself he'd find me. He only knew the fake name, the stolen photos, the made-up life constructed. He didn't know I worked in the office building. He didn't know my real name, where I lived, where I drove. I locked the screen and slipped the device into my bag, forced breath. The break room door clicked open, and Caroline stepped inside, and her hair fell perfectly on one shoulder, the same sleek style from the photos I'd used. She glanced at me, one eyebrow lifted in that familiar dismissive way, before she reached for the shelf. Still wrapping up that client report I asked for? Her tone was light, but there was a edge underneath it, the same edge I hope you did your feet on it. The leadership team is reviewing our department's week. My throat felt tight, gave a quiet nod, gathering my water bottle to leave. As I walked to my cubicle, my mind kept circling the message. You really shouldn't try. I'd planned for every loose end, or so I thought. But in that moment, a quiet settled in my chest, heavy and unshakable. What if I hadn't planned enough? What if vanishing wasn't as simple as blocking a few accounts and moving towns? I sat down at my desk, pulled my laptop open, and stared at the folder holding all the saved screenshot conversations, unsure whether to delete them right away or hold on to them just in case. In the back of my mind, I realized my clean escape might already be out of reach. The office hummed with quiet gossip the next morning, every lowered voice carrying fragments of the impersonation story. I kept my headphones on low while I worked, pretending to focus on spreadsheet formulas, so I would not overhear the things people were saying about Caroline and whoever had stolen her photos. Most of my coworkers seemed to assume the culprit was someone outside the company, a random stranger who scraped images off social media for some meaningless online scam. That small sliver of hope kept me breathing evenly through the first few hours of the day. Maya avoided me entirely. Normally, we stopped by the break room together mid-morning for water, but she slipped past my cubicle without a glance, her shoulders tight. I understood. She had spent years listening to me vent about Caroline's bullying, and she never expected I would respond by building an elaborate lie and accepting thousands of dollars from a stranger. I sent her a short text asking if we could talk again, but I never got a reply. The distance between us widened with every passing hour. Around 10 o'clock, an HR coordinator walked over and handed me a printed meeting request. The note asked me to sit down with the HR manager and our department lead after lunch to answer questions about the ongoing impersonation complaint. My fingers shook as I folded the paper and tucked it into my notebook. They had not named me as a suspect outright, but the invitation was clear enough. I spent the rest of the morning running through what I planned to say. I decided I would act confused, offer no extra information, and repeat that I knew nothing about fake profiles or stolen photographs. Across town, the private investigator Elias hired was mapping out the digital trail. The deleted social account left faint metadata behind: timestamps, login IP ranges, and device signatures that did not match Caroline's personal phones or home internet. The investigator noted the IP addresses traced back to a residential neighborhood north of Atlanta, not anywhere near Caroline's house. That detail alone told them the person running the fake profile lived somewhere else entirely. They wrote a preliminary update to Elias, explaining that the impersonator was a separate individual, likely someone who knew Caroline well enough to pull photos from her public social pages. Elias read the report slowly, his jaw tightening. He had suspected it, but confirmation made the hollow feeling in his chest. During lunch, I sat alone in my car and pulled up the separate savings account where I had moved Elias's. I briefly considered sending the full amount back, wiring every dollar to his bank account anonymously to try and erase that part of the mess. Then fear struck me. If I returned the money without explanation, it might only give the investigator more financial records to trace back to my identity. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the banking dashboard, stuck between two terrible choices with no clear safe path. Back inside the office, Caroline was speaking with her, laying out a timeline of strange messages she had received, and the email from. She still hesitated to point directly. Deep down, she found it hard to believe the quiet admin assistant would orchestrate something this complicated. But she did mention that I had been the only person in the office who regularly seemed uncomfortable, the only co-worker who kept to herself and avoided casual talk. That comment was enough to make our manager add my name to the short list of people. When the afternoon meeting, I sat across from the HR manager and lead, keeping my expression calm. They asked if I had ever seen anyone use Caroline's photo line, if I knew anyone who ran fake social media profiles, and whether I had heard coworkers discussing impersonation scams. I answered each question, saying I had not seen anything unusual and that I knew very little about the whole. The HR manager thanked me and said they might reach out again if they needed follow-up details. As I went to leave, I noticed her jotting a short note on the file in front of her, and a cold knot settled. I left the conference room wondering how much they already. By the end of the workday, the private investigator had narrowed the IP trail to a small cluster of townhomes. They still did not have a legal attached, but they were moving closer with every hour. Elias approved additional hours for the investigation, telling the team he wanted a full identification before he decided what action to take next. He still struggled to wrap his mind around the fact that the woman he had cared about for 8 months was not who. That night, I paced my living room and replayed the HR in my head, picking apart every. I told myself I had not slipped up, that I had not volunteered anything. But I also realized I had made a dangerous earlier. I thought Caroline would be the main person everyone suspected of creating a file. That mistake had left me unprepared for how quickly attention could shift onto me instead. The ground under my feet felt less stable than ever. Every lead the investigator followed pulled them near the front door, and the internal inquiry at work was slowly tightened too. I had thought I could outrun consequences, but now it felt like every door I tried to close only locked another part of me inside this mess. The weekend stretched out ahead of me, empty and heavy. Without the routine of the office to occupy my hands, every quiet moment left space for fear to settle in. I kept checking my bank app, half tempted to move the money again to an even less traceable account, yet knowing every transfer created another paper trail the investigator could follow. I stayed inside my townhome almost the entire 2 days, only stepping out once late Saturday night to grab groceries when the parking lot was nearly empty. I avoided the main aisles, kept my hood pulled low, and hurried back to my car before anyone I knew might spot me. Meanwhile, The private investigation team filed a request for deeper records tied to the IP address they had isolated. Working with digital forensics specialists, they cross-referenced login times with account activity, matched device signatures, and pulled subscriber information from the internet service provider. By Sunday evening, they held a name, Lila Mercer, resident of the townhome address they had mapped out days earlier. The lead investigator compiled a full packet for Elias, including public records, employment history, and a copy of the address linked to the internet connection used for the fake profile. Elias sat alone in his home office, reading through the file under warm lamplight. He read my full name, the marketing agency where I worked, even the date I had moved into the townhome 2 years prior. A strange mix of hurt and confusion washed over him. He had spent 8 months opening up to someone he believed was genuine, sharing quiet parts of himself he rarely showed anyone else. He scrolled back through old chat logs one more time, picking apart every story I had told him, every carefully crafted line. The investigator added a short note. There was no record of Lila Mercer and Caroline Hale sharing any close personal connection, only the same workplace. That detail made Elias pause. Why use Caroline's face specifically? On Monday morning, I arrived at work to find a calendar alert waiting in my inbox. HR requested a second formal interview before noon, this time with a written witness statement form and a request to review my work laptop history. My throat went dry. I had wiped my personal tablet, but my office computer still held emails, browser history, and login timestamps I could not erase without triggering IT alerts. I sat frozen at my desk for nearly 20 minutes, trying to think of a way. Caroline passed my cubicle on her way to a meeting and gave me a long search. There was no open accusation in her accent, only quiet suspicion, and that felt worse. Later that same morning, Elias sent a brief message to the investigator, arranged to confirm that Lila Mercer was indeed the person behind it, and compile all documentation of the financial transfer. He did not plan to rush into legal action immediately. First, he needed to understand the motive behind choosing. The second HR interview felt far more intense than that. The HR manager laid printed notes across the table, referencing the timeline of the fake profile activity and the fact that the impersonator worked with company. They asked again about my relationship with mine, whether there had been ongoing conflict. I hesitated before answering, admitting there had been friction overs, but framing it as typical offension, not target. I left out every specific incident, every time she had stolen my work or embarrassed me. By Monday noon, the PI confirmed the full chains. The fake account logged in from Lila Mercer's net. The payment routing matched the bank account where Elias's transferred. The entire trail led straight to me. Elias read the final information. For a moment, all the warmth he had felt during those 8 months turned cold. He now knew exactly who I was, where I worked, and how I had hidden behind Caroline's identity. That evening, I texted Maya again, asking to meet. She replied with a short, guarded message agreeing to a quick talk at the diner. When we sat across from each other, I admitted HR had called me in for a second interview, that things were escalating fast. I still did not say the investigator had found me, because I had not learned that truth yet. Maya sighed. Mary, I told you it would spiral. You can't keep pretending this will disown. I tried to explain that Caroline had made 3 years miserable, that I had only known. Maya shook her head, telling me pain did not grant permission to manipulate and lie. Our conversation ended at resolution, and I drove home feeling elated. I thought I understood the danger I was in, but I had no idea Elias already held my real name, my address, my employment details, and proof of every cent. The full weight of the evidence was stacked against me, and I had not even realized the worst part of the hunt was already over. The next morning began with an email from IT, notifying me they would perform a routine review of my work laptop by the end of the week. My hands shook as I closed the message, knowing there was no reliable way to scrub old searches or cached pages without triggering alerts. Any attempt to tamper with the device would look like an admission of guilt. I sat frozen at my desk, staring at the screen, while the rest of the office moved around me in their usual rhythm. Maya did not acknowledge me at all that day. When I passed her in the hallway, she looked away and kept walking. I understood her choice, even if it stung. She had warned me this would escalate, and I had ignored her. Now she refused to be pulled deeper into a problem she had not created. For the first time in years, I truly felt alone. There was no one I could call when panic woke me at 2 a.m. No friend to help me sort through my options without judgment. By midday, Caroline asked me to step into her small office. The door clicked shut behind me, leaving the two of us enclosed in quiet tension. She leaned against the edge of her desk, her expression sharp and tired. No trace of the casual superiority she usually wore around me. She laid printed screenshots across the wooden surface, copies pulled from the report she had filed with the social media platform. HR told me you were interviewed twice. They won't name a suspect outright, but I've put this together myself. It was you, wasn't it? My throat tightened. For a few seconds I considered lying again, repeating the same denials I had given HR, but the exhaustion of maintaining the lie finally broke through. I nodded slowly, my voice barely loud enough to fill the small room. I did it. I used your photos to make a profile. Caroline stared at me, surprise softening her anger for a heartbeat before frustration returned. She asked why, and the words spilled out. 3 years of stolen credit for my work, public criticism. In team meetings, being pushed aside every time I tried to advance. I told her how isolated I had become, how no manager had ever stepped in to stop it. She listened without interrupting, her arms unfolding as she processed everything I said. She did not apologize right away, but she did not dismiss my pain either. Before we could talk further, our department manager knocked and opened the door. The meeting ended abruptly, and I walked back to my cubicle with my chest burning. The secret I had guarded for 8 months was out in the open with Caroline. Now only HR and Elias remained unaware I had confessed, or so I believed. Across town, Elias reviewed the investigator's full report again. He had scheduled no legal action yet, but he had written a formal note outlining every financial transfer, ready to send to his attorney if he chose to move forward. The PI also passed along a small update. Caroline Hale and Lila Mercer worked closely, and there was documented workplace friction between them. That piece of context helped Elias begin to see the shape of my motive, though it did not excuse the deception. He spent the afternoon talking with his therapist, unpacking why the sudden ghosting and elaborate lie hit so close to his old abandonment wound. That evening, HR called to schedule a final formal interview for Thursday. The email stated the conversation would be recorded, and HR advised me to consider bringing a witness if I wished. I knew bringing Maya was no longer an option. I had no allies left inside or outside the office. I sat on my living room couch long after dark, weighing the consequences. Termination was nearly guaranteed, and civil claims over identity impersonation or wire fraud were possible too. The savings I had built from Elias's transfers might not even be mine to keep much longer. I had spent so long imagining freedom from Caroline's bullying, picturing myself moving north with enough money to start fresh somewhere no one knew my name. That future now felt impossible. I had lost my best friend, risked my career, and trapped myself in a lie that hurt a man who had been nothing but kind to the fake version. I had set out to escape being victimized, yet I had turned into someone who manipulated another person for security. I picked up the external drive holding every chat log and transfer receipt, turning it over in my hand. Destroying it would not erase the copies Elias already owned. There was no shortcut left, no clever way to undo what I had. All I could do was face the fall. A cold fear. I did not know whether Elias would demand repayment only, file a lawsuit, or try to meet with me in person. The worst part was that the choice was entirely his. I had handed him all the power the moment I built that fake profile and accepted his. The sun set completely outside my window, leaving my townhome dim, and I had lost nearly every support I once relied on. But in that stillness, I finally understood I could not keep running. Whatever came next, I would have to meet it head on. The Midtown cafe Elias agreed to was quiet, lined with dark wood tables and soft overhead lighting, far enough from downtown office towers that neither of us risked running into colleagues. I arrived 15 minutes early and sat at the back corner table, spreading the ledger and my written statement in front of me. My hands trembled slightly as I sipped cold water, replaying every conversation from those 8 months in my head. I had laughed with him, shared made-up hopes and quiet fears, all while hiding behind Caroline's face. Elias walked through the door right on schedule. He was taller than I had pictured from our online chats, dressed in a simple dark button-down instead of a tailored suit, and his expression held no obvious rage, only deep weariness. He slid into the seat across from me and waited for me to speak first. I pushed the ledger across the table toward him. I told him I was sorry, plainly and without excuses. I explained the 3 years of constant bullying at work, how I had grown desperate for an escape route, and how I had stupidly believed creating a fake profile and accepting his money would give me a clean way out. I laid out the total sum I owed him, and the monthly repayment plan I had drafted, even if I lost my job in the coming days. He read through the numbers slowly before lifting his gaze to meet mine. I spent months opening up to you. I talked about being abandoned by my mother as a teenager, about how hard it is for me to trust anyone long enough to build something real. That's why I grew so clingy. I thought I'd finally found someone who understood that fear. His voice stayed steady, but pain lingered beneath every word. I never would have sent that money if I knew none of it was real. If I knew you were pretending to be another person. I bowed my head, unable to argue. His trauma was real, and I had used it for my own gain. I didn't come here to immediately sue, Elias continued, but I also can't pretend this didn't hurt. Before I decide on next steps, I spoke with Caroline yesterday. My shoulders tensed. I had not realized he'd reached out to her ahead of our meeting. We talked for nearly an hour. She told me about the conflict between you, admitted she had treated you unfairly for years, even if she never meant to push you into something this extreme. She's prepared to sit down with all three of us together to figure out what happens. I stared at him in surprise. I had expected Caroline to demand consequences without hesitation, not agree to a joint conversation. Elias folded his hands on the My priority is getting the money. Beyond that, I want to understand what led here, not destroy your life entirely. But if you fail to stick to a repayment, I will involve my... We spent the rest of the afternoon refining the payment schedule. I confirmed I could begin monthly payments within 30 days, even taking on weekend freelance work to cover the amount if my full-time position ended. Elias agreed not to file fraud charges as long as payments arrived time. He also said he would not share the full story publicly around Atlanta's professionals, a concession I had not dared. By the time we leave, the tension between us, though trust could never be repaired, he took the ledger with him and nodded. Caroline will reach out soon to schedule the three. I walked out of the cafe into the warm afternoon air, my mind racing. All three of us now understood. Caroline knew the damage her workplace bullying me. I knew how deeply my lies wounded Elias, and Elias understood the long-standing conflict that drove my terror. No one was purely innocent, and no one could walk away completely. The easy, revenge-fueled escape I once dreamed of was... But for the first time since I sent that final question online earlier, I had a clear path forward. It would mean sacrifice, year repayments, and rebuilding my professional reputation from scratch. Still, it was a path, built on honesty instead of stolen photos and carefully lies. I woke Wednesday morning without the knot of panic that had lived in my chest for weeks. Fear was still there, quiet and heavy, but it no longer controlled every choice I made. I pulled my external drive from the closet and laid it on the kitchen table, alongside a notebook where I began drafting an honest statement. I did not write it to make excuses. I wrote it to separate the pain of 3 years of bullying from my own bad choices, to admit clearly that using Caroline's identity and accepting Elias's money had been wrong. Before heading into the office, I sent a short message to Maya. I told her I planned to take accountability for everything, that I understood why she could not stand beside me through this. I thanked her for trying to warn me before I dug the hole deeper. I hit send, knowing she might never reply, and slipped my phone into my bag. At work, the atmosphere felt different. Word had spread quietly that I had spoken with Caroline privately. Co-workers kept their distance, avoiding casual conversation. Caroline did not seek me out, but when our eyes met briefly across the office, there was no longer the usual dismissive glare. A fragile, unspoken truce hung between us. That afternoon, I received an unexpected email forwarded through HR. It came from Elias's legal assistant, stating Elias was willing to arrange a voluntary in-person meeting before any formal legal action was considered. The note said the conversation would not be recorded, and I could choose a neutral public location. My breath. I had assumed he would immediately hand everything to his attorney and demand repayment plus damages. The offer to talk face-to-face was not what I expected. I spent the evening weighing the risk. Meeting him meant confronting the person I had lied to for 8 months, answering every question he might ask. Still, it felt like the only chance I had to explain my full motive without speaking only through lawyers and formal paper. I replied to accept the meeting, suggesting a quiet cafe in Midtown Atlanta, far from both our workplace. Once the meeting was set, I turned my attention to the upcoming HR. I finished writing my statement, printed 2 copies, and reviewed every line to ensure I did not shift blame. I acknowledged creating the fake profile, using Caroline's photos, accepting financial transfers, and admitted I had planned to vanish without explanation. I included the history of workplace harassment only as context, not justification. The next day arrived, and I walked into the HR conference room for the recorded final. The HR manager and a witness sat across from me. I laid my written statement on the table and read it aloud. I answered every question truthfully, handing over a copy of the external drive's contents when they requested evidence of the online conversation. I did not hold anything back. By the end of the interview, the HR manager thanked me for cooperating and said a formal employment decision would be delivered within 3 business days. After leaving HR, I found Caroline in the break room. I told her I was meeting with Elias soon and planned to accept full responsibility. I said I understood if she still wanted to pursue identity impersonation claims to me, and I would cooperate with whatever she decided. She paused, sipping her coffee. I'm still angry about what you did. But I also never stopped to see how my behavior. Her voice calm. I'm not ready to you yet, but I won't rush to file a complaint before every evening. I packed the printed statement and a ledger listing every dollar Elias. I calculated the total amount I owed him, writing it clearly on the page along with a rough repayment plan I could manage with part-time work if I lost my current job. For the first time since I messaged Elias that final question before, I was not trying to manipulate an outcome. I was choosing parency, even if it cost me everything I had. I sat on my couch into the night, thinking about it. Elias had every right to be furious, to demand immediate repayment, to involve his attorneys. But he had chosen conversation first. That small choice gave me a narrow opening to make amends, not forgiveness, but to stop letting the lie continue to control all of us. Whatever happened in that cafe would set for my future, and for once, I intended to flee. We met in the same Midtown cafe 3 days later. This time all three of us sat around the back table, me, Elias, and Caroline. The air felt heavier than it had during my one-on-one meeting with Elias, thick with years of unspoken resentment and fresh hurt. A server set 3 glasses of water down and stepped quietly away, leaving us to talk. Caroline spoke first. She folded her hands on the table and looked directly at me, no defensiveness in her posture. I've spent the last few days thinking about everything. I know I made your 3 years at this agency miserable. I took credit for your work, undermined you in meetings, and brushed off every quiet signal that you were struggling. I never stopped to consider how my behavior affected you, and that was wrong. I'm sorry. The apology landed softly. Not grand or performative, just sincere. I had imagined this moment hundreds of times over the years, dreamed of her being forced to admit what she'd done. Now that it was real, the sharp anger I'd carried dulled. I told her I accepted the apology, even though I could not erase all the stress those years had left behind. Then it was my turn. I turned toward both of them, keeping my voice steady. I owe both of you an apology too. Caroline, I stole your photos and used your identity to build a fake relationship. That put you through fear, public confusion, and unnecessary stress. Elias, I lied about who I was for 8 months, leaned on your kindness, and accepted money under false pretense. There is no excuse for what I did. I will repay every dollar. Elias nodded. He pulled a drafted settlement outline from his folder and slid copies across the table for Caroline and me to read. The document laid out the full repayment of fixed monthly installments and a clause stating he would hold off on fraud and wire transfer legal action as long as payments stayed on schedule. It also noted he reserved the right to reopen the case if I missed multiple payments. Caroline's section of the agreement addressed the workplace conflict. She committed to speaking with leadership about her past behavior, completing workplace harassment, and not pursuing identity impersonation charges again, provided I abided by the repayment terms. She also agreed that she would not spread details of the incident to other industry contacts to ruin my career long. We read every line slowly, asking questions when wording felt I confirmed I could afford the monthly payments by picking up weekend freelance administrative, even if HR handed me a termination notice within days. Elias confirmed the payment schedule could be adjusted once if I faced unexpected financial hardship, a small measure of flexibility he did not have. Once we worked through every revision, we each initialed the draft. No signature. We planned to have our separate attorneys review the document before final The core deal will. The long chain of lies, bullying, and hurt would be resolved through accountability, instead of endless legal. As we prepared to leave, Caroline paused beside her. I'm going to talk to HR about what happened between us. I won't fight whatever decision they do, but I will be honest about my own role in creating that toxic work. I thanked her. Elias stood and gathered papers. He glanced at me one time. I hope you keep your word on the payments. More than that, I hope you find healthier ways to build safety for yourself in the future. Revenge does anything. He walked out first. Caroline followed a minute later, leaving me alone at the table with my copy. I stared at the paper, processing how what began as my plan to get back at a bully and escape a terrible job had dragged 3 people into a tizz. We had all hurt each other in ways, and now we each carried responsibility. The negotiation was done, but the hardest part's ahead. Sticking to the payment plan, facing whatever decision my employer made, and rebuilding my life without lies or manipulation. 2 weeks passed after our 3-way meeting. My attorney and Elias's went back and forth over small clauses in the settlement draft, adjusting wording to protect both sides before the final documents were ready to sign. Caroline kept her promise and met with HR, openly acknowledging her years of unprofessional treatment toward me. She completed mandatory conflict resolution training and spoke honestly about how the toxic friction between us had escalated into something far beyond office drama. On a Wednesday morning, the official employment letter arrived in my inbox. The company terminated my contract immediately, citing the identity impersonation incident and violation of workplace conduct policies. They noted Caroline's admission of ongoing hostile behavior as mitigating context, which spared me from being listed on internal industry blacklists. I sat at my now empty cubicle, packing a cardboard box with my personal mugs and notebooks. Coworkers kept their distance, but there were no whispered accusations. The full story stayed between the three of us as agreed. That afternoon, I signed the final settlement papers. The repayment schedule locked in regular monthly withdrawals from my bank account, stretching across nearly 3 years. It was a heavy burden, one that would force me to budget tightly and hold on to weekend freelance work for a long time. Still, I signed without hesitation. This was the price of the choice I had made, and I intended to honor every term. Maya sent me a brief text a few days later. She said she respected that I had taken accountability, and while our friendship would never go back to how it was, she was willing to stay in loose contact. The message made my chest feel lighter. I replied to thank her, knowing trust would take a long time to regrow, if it ever did. Months rolled by. I found a quieter remote administrative position with a small nonprofit outside Atlanta. The pay was low, but the team treated each other with respect, and there was no quiet bullying to endure. Every month I set aside the required payment for Elias, never missing a due. We never spoke again after the settlement was finalized. There was no closure conversation, no chance to become acquainted. The chapter between us simply ended, as it needed. I crossed paths with Caroline once, nearly a year later, at a regional marketing conference. We paused for a moment, nodded at each other, and went our separate ways. There was no warmth, no lingering anger. We had both accepted the harm we'd caused one another and moved forward. She remained at the agency, working to rebuild her professional reputation, while I built mine too. On the evening I submitted my final payment, I sat on the balcony of a smaller apartment I'd rented for north. The sky turned soft shades of orange and purple above the. I thought back to that day in the off-break room, when I typed that question to Elias, convinced vanishing with stolen money would. I had no wrong. True freedom did not come from outrunning consequences, or getting even with someone who hurt me. It came from facing my mistakes, making amends, and choosing honesty. I had lost my job, strained a close friendship, and carried years of debt to fix the mess I created. But I also learned to recognize when I was trapped in a harmment, and to seek healthy exits instead of lashing out in secret. The scars from those 3 difficult years at the agency never fully healed, yet they no longer controlled me. I closed my laptop and breathed in the cool air. The whole tangled story was finally settled. No more hit profiles, no more fear of investigators or legal letters. It was buried, and I was finally free to build a life rooted in the truth.